So welcome, everybody.
Hi, Annie.
Hi.
Hi there.
So
Hi, everyone.
to give everybody context, we're talking about the topic of the challenges of deploying SSI at scale. And each of you, I believe, comes from a very different perspective in the type of solution or the audience that you're working with. So I think it would be really helpful if each of you would introduce yourself, your role, and the solution that you're working with briefly. So let's start with Andrew.
Yeah, hi there. So Andy Tobin from Evernym. I run our business in Europe. Evernym essentially is a product company. We provide credential exchange platforms for businesses who want to issue and verify digital credentials. But behind the scenes, we're the originator of much of the technology behind self-sovereign identity. The creators of Hyperledger Indy, for example, the creators of the Sovereign Foundation. And we've also built a lot of the cryptographic code that we've open sourced that enables you to do complex things like zero knowledge proofs very, very simply and easily. But essentially what we do is any organization that wants to issue and verify credentials, we have a platform that lets them do that.
Great, thank you. And Andre, would you introduce yourself next?
My pleasure, thank you. So my name is André Kudra. I'm the CIO of esatus AG. We are in the space of information security, particularly in identity and access management. And we are sovereign steward since the early days and very intense and enthusiastic promoters of self-sovereign identity. So what we have done, we have built a completely enterprise-ready identity and access suite based on self-sovereign identity technology. And we are working with our customers to roll that out in their respective domains. It's completely industry agnostic. Everyone who wants identity and access SSI-based can come to us to do it.
Wonderful, thank you. And Eddie, would you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Eddie Kago. I'm the founder and CEO of Vibranium ID, which is doing SSI here in Nairobi. And what you're building is SSI for organizations. So we designed Queli, an African trust framework that's relying on self-sovereign identity. And the first use case that we looked at was how can we make the African continental free trade area, which is like our EU that's coming up, work best. And our initial use case is enabling an insurance provider set up organizational identity for their clients because they're like a reinsurer. So for their other insurance companies under it. And the main thing that we do with Queli is so that we can enable it now for also personal identity and make it work for portable ID here in Africa.
Fantastic, thank you. So let's jump straight into some topic questions. And let's start out first looking at interorganizational credential exchange. And so let's lay out some of the benefits here for those who aren't aware. How in each of your spaces, how do you see the benefits here, and maybe throw in a few examples? Andrew, why don't you begin?
Yeah, sure. So one of the key benefits of verifiable credentials is that you're using an open identity protocol. You're able to take a credential given to you by one organization and share it with another without those organizations needing to talk to each other. So probably one of the biggest examples we have at the moment, we're involved in a rollout of some significant scale in the UK, is with the National Health Service for what they're calling a digital staff passport. And it's been a really interesting process, actually. You might think the National Health Service, they employ like a million people or so. And you might think of them as one single organization, but they're actually a large conglomerate of separate organizations, hospitals, trusts, and so on. So as such, it's a perfect example for a use case for self-sovereign identity, where a doctor needs to go from one hospital to another. The other hospital doesn't necessarily know who that doctor is. They need to prove who they are, need to give them the ability to log into hospital systems and so on. And I think Dr. Manrit Nijar will be talking about this in much more detail later. But it's been really interesting to see the decisions that have had to be made for this rollout, because each hospital is a different organizational entity, is a separate issuer verifier in its own right. They're not putting together a single NHS centralized system, they're doing it properly, if you like. So we can go into more details about some of the technology considerations, but things like, where are the keys? If each hospital is a separate organization, how is that deployed? And in fact, they're deploying separately on their own cloud capability with Microsoft for that. So it's been really interesting looking at the non-technical aspects of it. We talk about a lot about credentials and decentralized identifiers, but you need to think about the information governance people. You need to think about the lawyers that are looking at liability. You need to think about staff training, feedback, manuals you have to produce, websites, etc. So there's a lot more to it than just the technology.
Thank you. And Andre, what's your perspective on this, on the benefits and examples from inter-organizational credential exchanges?
I'm obviously a big fan of that, but obviously I think we need to start with internal organization processes first. So even if we were able to share broadly across organizational boundaries, which we can technically, it's still a matter of convincing single customers first to employ the technology internally. And then I'm very sure of that. The appetite will grow to use it across boundaries. And this is actually very well enabled by verifiable credentials and the tech we have at hand. But the first stage is obviously to start with organizations, with customers who can take the decision on their own, they want to build something. And then we can increase the outreach across organizational boundaries. And I think we will see that happen frequently now. And as Andy rightfully said, we have groups of organizations. So you don't have a single large bank as a legal entity. They have many legal entities. So if we enable them, then they can use it in their conglomerate already. And then we can increase the visibility and outreach to other organizations even beyond that.
Thank you. And Eddie, what is your perspective here?
Okay, classic. So in terms of interorganization credential exchange, what we're looking at doing mostly here is helping business entities and business-like bodies be able to share information. So I mentioned that we're working on like an insurance use case. And one of the things we're looking at here is we have an existing business registry service in Kenya and modeled modeled on like the basic kind of architecture using our SSI, because what our BRS does is that once you register a business, let's say with the Revenue Authority, you get your revenue license, and you may be required to do that and show that for collateral to the collateral registry, and these are things that have lots of delays. So the best ways which we approaching it is for business to business identity, because getting out to like a personal kind of credential exchange, it may not be very useful for day-to-day results. So first thing we're doing is enabling now umbrella bodies interact with each other for insurance and government, so private to the public participation.
Great, thank you. So then considering how to achieve some of these solutions at an architectural level, so what infrastructure decisions could an organization face when they're looking to deploy an SSI solution? Andrew, let's cycle back to you.
Yeah, sure. So we've actually got a framework that we use to take an organization through what they need to do and the decisions they need to make. The first one is on the infrastructure deployment. How are they going to deploy? And there's 4 parts to that. The first one is, are they going to self-host everything on premise? So that's their own machines. It's working in their own data centers. They've got full control over access, all the keys, and so on. The second is self-hosting on their own cloud infrastructure. That's essentially what the NHS are doing. So again, you have control, but it's in someone else's data center. You still have full control over your whole stack. The third one is what we call off the shelf. So you're getting someone else to host the stack, but you have control over your own private keys. And then the fourth one is what we call off the shelf, fully outsourced, where you don't necessarily have full control over your private keys. An admin from the organization you're hosting with could do something if they wanted. So they need to decide that deployment architecture first and where their risk level is for that. Then they need to decide on the digital relationship control. How do they need to control the digital relationships they're setting up? And that essentially means, are they going to be an issuer of credentials in their own right? Are they going to maintain these persistent connections between themselves and everyone they're issuing or verifying credentials with? And also, where's their wallet and the wallets of their customers going to sit? The wallets are where the digital credentials sit. And then thirdly, is really functionality. It's what functional capabilities out of the whole menu of digital credential exchange and everything else do they need to put in place. So are they going to be an issuer or a holder or a verifier or all 3 or 2 of those? Are they going to be doing real-time secure chat? Are they going to be doing login and so on? So you take those 3 things: infrastructure deployment, the digital relationship control, and the functionality pieces, and you can get some pretty quick decisions that let you shape how the rollout would work for an organization.
Thank you. And André, what do you have to add here?
Yeah, Andy put it so well. I think I can just add to that. So maybe start from a different angle. Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things that you don't have to do. So actually, you don't have to build your own network. So that's one for sure. So you don't even have to run your own node. So I think that's a common misperception that people think even if they want to get in touch with SSI, they need to choose a network and build up a node to operate it, because then it's the only chance for them to have access to the network also in terms of writing. That's totally not the case. So you don't have to build your own chain, ledger, whatever. You don't have to host your own node. You just have to have the agent that talks to the ledger. And that was what Andy outlined so very well, the different options, what you can do to do the hosting. Thanks, Andy. So the thing is, that's obviously the decision which ledger you want to use. There's a couple of out there. There's coming new ones up. And then you have to exactly do what everyone has to determine. What do you want to do with it? And what is the data that you want to exchange, and come up with a framework that helps you to solve the challenge. So particularly in identity and access management, I think we have best practices available to do stuff like that. And it's a very common and tangible use case. If someone wants to log into a system that is offered by an organization, he has to prove certain facts about himself, and he can do this via verifiable credentials. But you have to determine which ones to show. So it may be that I just have to prove that I'm a member of esatus AG to access our corporate intranet and have a login to basic functionality. But if I want to have more in-depth functionality, I would have to present other data items which qualify that I'm a member of a certain project, of a department, or on the executive level. So that are the key decisions in addition to what Andy stated.
Thank you. And Eddie, what do you have to add on infrastructure considerations that an organization would have?
Okay. So what Andrew was saying about not having to set up your own basic infrastructure foundational, I agree on that. And one of the things that would be also key would be having intermediaries, but not intermediaries in a centralized form. Intermediaries in the sense that you have an agent hosting it for you. For let's say you're setting up for what we have here in things like when we have agent networks which get things to the people, and for having infrastructure and for SSI at scale. One thing I have in mind is that there needs to be existing that can introduce a new behavioral change to people that this is SSI and this is how you should set up your own infrastructure. But in as much as we would say lots of things, there's also the place for mass education. So there has to be awareness on as to what they need to be. Remember what Tobin was saying about having the different layers of infrastructure choices. So if people are more educated and organizations are more educated on what they really need, that would make more sense.
Great, thank you. And let's jump to everybody's favorite question, which is, what about GDPR? What policy and regulation considerations are really wrapped up in this SSI question? Andrew, back to you.
Yeah, thanks for giving me that one first. There's a lot of benefits with digital credential exchange around the consent that the person provides when they're sharing information, because it's coming from them, it's not coming from some separate third party. So I think David Chadwick alluded to this in his earlier presentation. The biggest challenge for rolling out at scale is getting the information governance and legal people at the organization to understand this new paradigm for how things work, right? They think when they start with it and they've never come across SSI before, they're thinking, okay, there's some big central database somewhere, right? Rather than the person themselves being the courier of the data. And that data coming with their permission. So you have to go through this kind of learning exercise to explain how things work. And then they have to process that and understand it, and then work it into their policies and procedures and produce a risk plan for it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a technical issue whatsoever. It's more of a governance framework issue. And if you look at the trust over IP framework that was released earlier this year, it gives you a kind of menu for all of the things you need to have to roll out an SSI ecosystem. And one of those is, how do the various legal aspects of it and compliance aspects of it work? So yeah, it's not so much a technical thing, although SSI has huge benefits from a GDPR perspective.
Thank you. And André, what is your perspective here?
Yeah, it's a funny thing that we're always starting off with GDPR, as there are so many other things to consider in that space. But I consider GDPR basically a non-issue for SSI as we live it with Hyperledger Indy and basically Sovereign, because there is no personal data, personal identifiable information stored on the ledger, full stop. This is only the case if something goes terribly wrong. So we are not persisting personal DIDs on a ledger. So that would be a personally identifiable information that's pertaining to a non-legal entity person. So we're not doing that. So if that happens, that's an accident, at least in the sense of common understanding how GDPR is interpreted today. So the thing is, if we're not doing that, what are we talking about in terms of GDPR compliance? We are compliant because the sole person who has data about himself is the user, because he has it in his wallet, as can be outlined. So let's look at other regulations. So what's obviously of great importance for us Europeans is IDAS regulation. So that's something that everyone is now looking at, how SSI is compliant to regulation like that. We have other stuff like IT-Sicherheitsgesetz in Germany and other regulations. And we are now we are part of a state-funded Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs funded project where we're looking into various regulations and getting a legally vetted view. What do they mean in terms of SSI? And this is now happening as part of the competition phase of SSI for Germany, which is the project we're in. And we will look at the outcome and then identify particular points that we need to address. But GDPR, from my point of view, as we are currently practicing it, is solved. If we look at things that we have available to remediate these issues, we can look into the tombstones again. So data sets are rendered to not being returned again. So we have good stuff there. So I think we have other stuff that we have to look at.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Eddie, can you wrap us up with ideas and perspectives on policy considerations?
Yeah, let me close as usual. In terms of what, I mean, there's GDPR. It applies here, but not like as GDPR. Our variation is the Kenya Data Protection Act, and it's the AU Data Protection Act as well. And based upon that, from my experience, has really having to even take like a printed document, like a legal printed document of how we handle user privacy, as much as we're doing SSI. That's why, as I was emphasizing in my previous point, that there's need for more and more awareness as to what's going on the ledger and what's staying in the cloud, and who's handling what's staying on your device. Because I mean, all these data protection acts will always be there. New regulation will always be there, trying to catch up with what's happening. But what's happening now, let's say with sovereign, is there's a token conversation. So what happens now if the token comes in? Do we now have SEC coming in play because it's a security, it's a utility token, or whatever class it would be under? So I'd look at it more in terms of the most minimal information possible and the most minimal use cases possible. And then now the integrating solutions would now be the ones handling their, like integrating solutions in the sense of use cases, not the ones handling their individual data problems, their data protection needs.
Wonderful.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
And do I get to go last again?
Well, we've run to the end of our time. We have so much to talk about here and only a limited amount. And so I would thank all three of you for your participation here and the insights that you've shared from your experience. So thank you very much to all three of you.